Why?
Hey, I remember you. You fought with the young Provenzano boy. For your honor.
I dreamed to be like you. Rispettato.
You dreamed of being like me. Well, now you are. You want respect? Behave as though you deserve it. Look at your father. He risked everything for you to come here. You are his hope.
Where is my hope?
Inside yourself.
We have nothing. Why they hate us?
Look what we have achieved. They brought us here to be their servants. In less than a generation, we threatened to be their masters. When we work together, we can do anything.
When we work together, they call us Mafia.
They say Mafia to create fear. We are protected by laws and by justice. We do not need the Mafia.
Signore McGregor, you have money. Maybe laws protect you.
In the war, I fought with the Louisiana infantry for those laws. I saw men give their lives for those laws. They are mine and they are yours. And they will not forsake us.
What is the Mafia? Do you want to understand America? Forget the textbooks. Forget the patriotic slogans and sanitized timelines. The truth is that this country wasn't built by dreamers and farmers. It was built by two secret societies, one from the streets, one from the stars. One born in Sicilian blood, the other in Enlightenment fire. And both believed in power. Sacred, silent, generational power. On one side, you had the mystics, the architects, men like Isaac Newton. Yes, that Newton who wasn't just chasing apples. He was chasing God, chasing the math behind Scripture, the code buried inside the Bible. He believed the universe was a machine, designed, ordered, divine. And if you could unlock that machine, you could unlock everything. Immortality, prophecy, destiny. Newton and his kind couldn't say this out loud. The church would have burned them. So they went underground. Secret lodges, quiet rituals, networks of thinkers, priests, scientists, alchemists. Not to rebel against religion, but to protect it, their version of it. A fusion of science, faith, and control. That was the origin of the secret societies that would shape the Western world. And when the New World opened, they followed. Not as pilgrims, but as planners. The Founding Fathers weren't just rebels. They were Masons, deists, Christian Zionists. They believed America was chosen, that this was the land where prophecy would play out, where divine order would become national policy. A republic, yes, but one with biblical scaffolding and mathematical bones. Newton's ghost was in the room when the Constitution was drafted. They built it into everything. Symbols, cities, systems. It wasn't a conspiracy. It was a strategy, a faith disguised as governance, and the elite carried it forward through universities, intelligence agencies, banking boards, war councils. The mission: preserve the vision, at any cost. But while they were building empires in silence, another kind of secret society was rising, grittier, bloodier, just as structured, just as sacred. New Orleans, not Ellis Island, not Brooklyn. The real American Mafia started in the Gulf. Sicilians didn't come through the front door. They came through the swamps, the bayous, brought with them a code: omerta, loyalty, faith, silence. They weren't chasing dreams. They were building systems, syndicates, power structures rooted in the same ancient principles as Newton's crowd: secrecy, hierarchy, obedience. The Matranga family was running New Orleans before New York even knew what the Mafia was. Controlling docks, skimming unions, making order out of chaos, French, Spanish, African, Catholic, voodoo chaos. It wasn't just rackets. It was governance. And they didn't ask for permission. They were the permission. By the mid-1800s, the New Orleans Mafia wasn't some branch of the Five Families. It was the trunk. And when Carlos Marcello inherited that system, he didn't just become a mob boss. He became a governor of the underworld. Quiet, brutal, untouchable. April 1961. Robert F. Kennedy gets sworn in as Attorney General. First name on his hit list? Marcello. He doesn't indict him. He doesn't charge him. He has him snatched and dropped in Guatemala. No trial, no headlines. Just gone. Why Guatemala? Because that's where United Fruit Company's roots were. That's where the coups d'etats happen. This wasn't just law enforcement. This was war. One secret society versus another. And it had been brewing since 1957, when a meeting in Appalachian blew the lid off the American underworld. Dozens of mob bosses in suits and Cadillacs caught at a rural New York estate. That's when the feds got the list. Names, titles, territories. And they stopped chipping at the edges. They started aiming for the foundation. But the foundation wasn't just crime. It was culture, a belief system, a parallel authority. Just like Newton's lodges, the Mafia operated on codes of loyalty, silence, divine justice. You didn't just betray a man, you betrayed the faith. And you paid for it in this life and the next. Both systems, Newton's secret faith and the Sicilian Code, were born from the same human need: control when chaos reigns. Whether it was monarchs, empires, or collapsing democracies, people didn't turn to politics. They turned inward, to brotherhood, to scripture, to blood. One group built universities, the other ran ports. But both operated under the same truth. Knowledge is power, and real power doesn't ask for attention. It hides behind it. So, what is America, really? It's not just a nation, it's a stage, a projection of two competing and sometimes cooperating codes. The high priests and the street bosses, the founding fathers and the silent dons, the men in robes and the men in suits, and between them, everything else. The wars, the coups, the empires, the headlines. Do you want to understand this country? Don't just look at who's elected, look at who's protected. New Orleans, 1867. They weren't yet calling it the Mafia, not in America, not in the open, but the blood was already hitting the sidewalks, and the names that would echo for over a century were already showing up in court records and coroner reports. Names like Matranga. It started small, the kind of incident the city was used to brushing off. Two Sicilian boys, Antonio Matranga and Cristofel Rosa, were picked up for something that didn't look so small once you read past the headline. Attempted murder. The target, Erastus Wells, commissary of the Poydras market, a market official, a city man. The attack was brutal, a stabbing at the corner of St. Joseph and Baronne, or maybe Triton Walk, depending on which cop told the story. Either way, Wells bled out on the sidewalk, and three names went into the record: Antonio Matranga, Cristofel Rosa, and Salvador Rosa. The Rosa family had a fruit stand in the market, classic front, but the father sold out and vanished the day after the hit. Cops called that suspicious. That was putting it lightly. There was no trial, just delays. The boys were arraigned, remanded, and held to see if Wells would live. They never got that far in the papers. The story faded, but the name Matranga didn't. Fast forward a few years. The New Orleans Republican posts the names of its Crescent City Republican Club. It's a who's who of politically active men, whites, blacks, immigrants, mixed classes. Buried in that list, N de Matranga and Salvador Street. Rome's, another Matranga, this time linked not to blood, but to politics. But in New Orleans, the line between politics and violence was paper thin, and families like the Matrangas learned early that political cover was better than a pistol when it came to power. By the late 1870s, Antonio "Tony" Matranga had leveled up. No longer a teenager with a knife, now a saloon keeper, a keno operator, a shot caller at the corner of Basson and Poydras, a crossroads where vice ran deep and the police stayed out unless someone died. Someone did. November 13th, 1879. A porter named Leon Casiano catches a bullet in the back just below the shoulder blade. The shot goes through his lung, clips the left atrium of his heart, and lodges in his sternum. He bleeds out before help can arrive. Witnesses say the shooter was Tony Matranga, yes, that Tony Matranga, owner of the Keno Hall across the street. The beef, over 50 cents. A gambler named McAlvin had beat Tony's house for $5, but walked off without cashing in. Later, he sends Casiano back to collect. When the count comes 50 cents short, Casiano walks back in, pushing for the rest. Words are exchanged. Fists fly. Casiano gets a pistol in his face and is thrown out. Tony swears he'll kill him. An hour later, a shot rings out. Casiano drops. Police find Matranga just outside his home. He denies everything. There's no smoking gun. The witnesses walk back their stories. They say they heard things, but not saw. Judge Sheehan releases them all on their own recognizance. But Tony? He gets remanded to the parish prison, no bail. The coroner's report is precise. Bullet through the back, through the lung, through the heart. Death by massive internal bleeding. Cold, clean, professional. Like someone had done it before. No one called it organized crime yet. But the blueprint was there. Extortion on the docks, influence in politics, blood in the streets. And at the center of it, quietly, steadily, the Matranga family. This wasn't New York. It wasn't Chicago. It was New Orleans. And it was happening a full generation before anyone north of the Mason-Dixon line knew what the word mafia really meant. New Orleans, November 1879. The killing of Leon Cincino wasn't just a street beef gone wrong. It was a test, for the city, for the courts, and for the name Matranga. It started over 50 cents. 50 cents. A gambler named McAlvin had beat the house at Tony Matranga's Keno joint for a few bucks. Instead of cashing in, he walked across the street to Sala's coffee house, dropped the chips with a porter, Cincino, and told him to collect. Cincino came back with most of it. Most. He was short 4 bits. That's when the trouble started. Tony Matranga, running the joint like he owned the whole block, because back then he basically did, refused to make good. Called Cincino a liar. Cincino didn't back down. Said it to his face. You swindled me. That was enough. Tony came out from behind the bar and punched him. Leon punched back. They scuffled. Tony kicked, missed, and fell on his back. He got up humiliated, pulled himself together, walked behind the bar, and grabbed a gun. He followed Cincino across the street, pistol in hand, but was blocked by employees at Sala's. Emmett Oliver held him at the waist. Sala himself pried the weapon out of Tony's hand. For now, the situation cooled. But not for long. An hour later, Tony stood in the doorway of his saloon, staring at the coffee house across the street. He had the pistol again. The room at Sala's was closing up. Leon Cincino moved to lock the front door. That's when it happened. From the shadows, a hand appeared, holding a pistol, a single shot. Cincino took the slug square in the back. The bullet ripped through his lung, shredded the left atrium of his heart, and lodged in his sternum. He dropped. Witnesses froze. One, George Ford, swore he saw the shooter. It was Tony Matranga, walking into the saloon just after the shot, trying to cock the gun again. Manuel Prager wrestled it out of his hand. Deputy Jerry Duggan was already nearby when it happened. Special Officer Dave Hennessy, yes, that Dave Hennessy, took the pistol and logged it as evidence. By the time Officer Reeves arrived, the crowd was pointing up Basin Street. Reeves ran and found Tony just standing there, Cool, collected, like nothing had happened. He was placed under arrest. No pistol on him. Just a reputation, a history, and about a dozen people who'd seen too much. In the inquest, witness after witness gave pieces of the puzzle. Some swore they saw Tony fire. Others walked their stories back. Said they couldn't be sure. Said it was dark, crowded, chaotic. Louis Sala, the coffee house owner, told the coroner about Tony being thrown out of his place earlier that night, gun in hand. Even Prager, the man who took the gun from Tony, suddenly wasn't so sure. Didn't see anything, he said. Couldn't identify the weapon. Claimed he just picked it up after the fact. But too many people had seen too much for it to be a coincidence. A shot, a body, a pistol, a name. The coroner's jury didn't hesitate. Leon Cincino, they ruled, died from a gunshot fired by Tony Matranga. The bullet entered below the left shoulder blade, passed through the lung and heart, and killed him where he stood. The murder weapon, a pistol, had passed through too many hands to be clean. But Matranga was held, without bail, remanded to the parish prison. No plea deal, no confession. Just a wall of silence, and the sense that this wasn't some hot-headed brawl. It was business. Tony never blinked. He denied everything. In the meantime, the streets kept talking. This wasn't the first time the Matranga name came up in court, and it wouldn't be the last. A few months later, another Matranga, Peppino, a cobbler, was picked up for trying to butcher a woman at a vegetable stand in the French market. Motive? She wouldn't let him marry her daughter. He stabbed her 3 times, ditched a revolver in a basket, and disappeared into the city. The cops caught him days later. The woman survived. But the message was clear. The name Matranga was becoming synonymous with violence, calculated, personal, and public. This was New Orleans in the 1870s. The police were outgunned, the courts outmaneuvered, and the Mafia wasn't even supposed to exist yet. But the Matrangas were already running a prototype, and the body count was rising. By now, Tony Matranga was more than just a saloon keeper. He was a known quantity, the man at the corner of Basin and Poydras. If you were hustling, gambling, bleeding, or breathing too loud near that intersection, chances are Tony had something to say about it. And if you had a problem with him, you'd better pack a blade or a pistol, because his place wasn't a bar. It was a den, and by 1881, it had a body count and a rap sheet to match. It didn't take long after the Cincino killing for the chaos to keep rolling. The courts knew his name. Judges saw it in civil suits, like when Charles Matranga tried to file against T.N. Boylan and got shot down by Judge Lazarus. But the real heat came from the streets. May 1881. A dice game inside Tony's back room explodes into a war zone. The crowd's mostly black gamblers and the pot is fat. One man, Charles Bush, gets lucky. But when he refuses to spread the wealth to Tony's house muscle, guys like Charles Talley, the so-called striker, the night turns violent. Bush gets jumped. Talley pulls a knife, cuts a man named Gabe Nolden. Others flee into Basin Street, weapons flashing. Police respond. Officer Frank McEntee corners Talley, gets slashed, and drops him with a bullet to the thigh. That shot sets off a wave of gunfire. One bullet finds Kit Gordon, an innocent man sitting on his stoop, shot in the back. A bystander caught in a storm that started with loaded dice and unpaid tribute. June 1881, another name joins the casualty list. A woman named Lula White is slashed in the side during yet another melee. Again, inside Tony Matranga's saloon. She survives, doesn't name her attacker, doesn't go to the hospital. Another open wound swept under the rug. And it didn't stop with customers. Even the police had trouble keeping the Matrangas in line, or the street trash they attracted. October 1881, a loud-mouthed degenerate named Billy Feeney loses 50 cents inside Tony's place, blames the house, starts trouble, gets bounced by Tony personally, Twice. The third time, Feeney doesn't just come back. He punches Tony's elderly father in the face on the way in. The sons, including Tony, come flying. Fists, knives, blood. Police break it up, but Feeney escapes. He's caught later by Corporal Murphy, surrounded by a mob of 50 angry men who nearly riot when he's cuffed. Feeney's locked up. Tony presses charges. Feeney fires back with his own, accusing a cop of roughing him up. Typical back and forth. But what matters is this. It took 10 officers to make one arrest. That's the kind of weight Tony's name carried. Even drunk hoodlums didn't move without backup. And just in case you thought the place had mellowed out by Christmas. December 27th, 1881. A trio of women, Lotta Dabak, Jenny Robinson and Fanny Hicks, go at it with knives inside Tony's place. Fanny ends up stabbed in the arm and wrist. All three are hauled in. The paper calls them Amazons. The cops call them a problem. The Matrangas? Just another night in the office. Tony's saloon wasn't just a bar. It was a flashpoint, a magnet for violence. But it was also a hub, and that's what mattered most. Men came and went, but Tony stayed. Year after year, his name kept coming back up. Charges, killings, beatings, but he never disappeared. Not yet. Because while New York was still organizing and Chicago was still figuring out who was boss, New Orleans already had one. And his name was Matranga. By this point, Tony Matranga's joint at Basin and Poydras wasn't just a dive. It was a civic disgrace. The papers didn't mince words. They called it a den. Not a saloon, not a gambling hall, just a den. Something that crawled in filth and breathed violence. A place that didn't just attract trouble, it manufactured it. On paper, it was still a business. Tony kept it running, even after the police raids, even after the killings. He still listed himself at official addresses. He was even connected to Italian social organizations, like the Tiro al Bersaglio, a shooting club with Giuseppe Matranga listed as secretary. But don't let the letterhead fool you. Behind the doors of 296 Poydras, nothing was about sport or fraternity. Inside the building, every room had a purpose, and none of it legal. A front bar divided by a screen, the clean side for well-dressed black men, the back for soot-covered kitchen girls and drunken dancers. Behind that, a Monty room for card play and con games. A back room for anything that didn't fit elsewhere. Gambling, sex, hiding a body, take your pick. Across the hall, a keno room, a dice room, a rough-cut dance hall with bare walls and boards for benches, packed to suffocation, with bodies drenched in whiskey, sweat, and whatever passed for music. Violin, guitar, flute, brass, nothing pleasant. And if the music didn't make you dizzy, the stench did. This was where fights started, and where feuds ended. It's where Charles Dyers, a black gambler, was stabbed to death by Bob Williams. No one saw a thing. And on May 28th, 1882, another body count began. It started outside, maybe. That was up for debate. But Harry Smith, a black man with a grudge, came out of Tony's saloon and ran into William Feeney, a notorious white brawler with his own rap sheet. Feeney drew first, fired 5 shots at Smith. Smith ran. But he wasn't running scared. He was running armed. They ended up across the street, inside another coffee house, bleeding out in the back. Feeney caught 3 stab wounds, one across the back, one under each shoulder blade. Smith took a bullet in the arm. When police came to arrest them, another man, A.P. Fields, tried to play smart. I acted like a bystander, but knew too much. He got cuffed, too. On the walk to the central station, Fields got jumped, slashed in the back 3 times at Dryads and Poydras by a man later identified as Randolph Doyle, a street ghost with a blade. It didn't kill Fields, but it confirmed what the cops already knew. Everyone around Matranga's had enemies, and no one was afraid to finish business in the open. By morning, the paperwork was stacked. Harry Smith, principal in the stabbing of Feeney, $2,500 bond. AP Fields, accessory, $1,500 bond. Randolph Doyle, cutter of Fields, $500 bond. All were due back June 2nd, in front of Judge Sheehan. Feeney survived, barely. When questioned, he denied the feud was over a recent scuffle involving Smith's brother. He said it had been building for a while, old bad blood. Sunday night just made it boil. Meanwhile, the press was fed up. They called Matranga's place one of the vilest dens in the city. Not a metaphor, not hyperbole. The vilest, filth, violence, blood, the smell of desperation and cheap liquor. A breeding ground for future tragedies. If you were stabbed, shot, or beaten anywhere near Bassin and Poydras, odds were your night started or ended at Tony Matranga's. The police knew, the courts knew, but nothing stuck. The Matrangas weren't just tough, they were embedded in street politics, immigrant networks, even community clubs like Tiro al Bersaglio, where Giuseppe signed checks and picked up mail. They weren't outsiders, they were becoming insiders, and the body count wasn't over yet. By mid-1882, Tony Matranga's den at Basin and Poydras had evolved into something more than a neighborhood menace. It was a city-wide punchline with a body count, a cesspool of gambling, bloodletting, whiskey, political cover, and dance hall depravity. It was, in the words of the press, one of the vilest dens in the city, and it was getting harder to ignore. Night after night, it ran like a factory for the worst human impulses. May 29th, 1882, another stabbing. This time, Alice Johnson, a black woman, shows up at Charity Hospital, arm sliced open. Says she was cut at a dance house. Everyone knows which one. She won't name the man who did it. That's the code. The wound isn't fatal, so she walks. That same month, Maria Lee and Henrietta Oliver, both local sex workers, break out into a fight so filthy, even Matranga's regulars call it too much. The cops, for once, are allowed inside and haul them out. Meanwhile, the fallout from the May 28th Street brawl, the one that left William Feeney stabbed, Harry Smith shot, and AP Fields gashed, finally lands in Judge Sheehan's courtroom. Witnesses vanish. Motives blur. All charges are dropped, except for Harry Smith, who gets hit with a $1,000 bond for a wound less than mayhem. That's how they phrased it. Less than mayhem. Like the city had grown numb to violence unless a limb came off. Still, the press kept up the pressure. They painted Matranga's place as a fever dream. Unventilated, packed wall-to-wall with sweat-drenched bodies, reeking of rot and cheap whiskey, all swaying to the squeal of a violin and the thump of dice on rough pine. Fights, stabbings, shootings, all common. But Tony? Tony stayed untouchable. The papers hinted why. Sustained by the strongest political influences. That's how a blood-soaked saloon could host a ball the same week it sent someone to the hospital. While bodies hit the floor inside, G. Matranga, possibly Giuseppe, was signing his name to public obituaries and society announcements. He served as secretary of the Italian Tiro al Bersaglio, the city's Italian Sharpshooters Society. He and the organization publicly mourned Giuseppe Garibaldi, the Italian nationalist, with grand proclamations and 6 months of mourning. Meanwhile, across town, women were getting stabbed under oil lamps at the family's saloon. July 29th, another funeral. Giuseppe Delaire Valle, 67 years old, dies after 32 years in New Orleans. Matranga signs off on the burial. This time it's G. Matranga, secretary. The family name floats easily between criminal enterprise and civic respectability, a balancing act that would define them for decades to come. But the street never rests. November 1882. Salvatore Matranga buys property from Gustav Kohn. Real estate deals running quietly behind the violence, like every good mob foundation. $600 for lots in Holly Grove. Dirt cheap, but valuable later. Then comes the new year. January 3rd, 1883. Jenny Williams, another sex worker, lifts $6 off a man during a ball at Matranga's. She gets collared. He gets locked up too, just to make sure he shows for court. That's how the cops were handling it now. Grab everyone, sort it out later. January 12th. Robert Kelly shows up at Matranga's armed. Not an uncommon precaution in that place. He's caught with a concealed weapon and hauled in. No shots fired. This time. January 18th. Chaz, Haynes and Jeff Clark, two black men, get into it during another dance. Fists start flying. Knives don't get drawn, but only because the cops arrive fast. Arrests are made. Again, just another night at Matranga's. By 1883, the pattern was obvious. The cops were regulars, not as customers, but as cleanup. The wounded walked out as often as they were carried out. Arrests were made. Charges were dropped. And through it all, the Matranga name stayed steady. On real estate deeds, civic notices, and society letters. No convictions, no shutdown. Just a saloon that doubled as a war zone, and a family that walked in both worlds, violent street power and quiet social legitimacy. This wasn't just survival, it was strategy, and the next generation would take that strategy and build an empire. New Orleans, 1883. By now, the corner of Basin and Poydras was something more than infamous. It was radioactive. Tony Matranga's den had outgrown its reputation as just a violent dive. It was a magnet for criminals, fugitives, gamblers, prostitutes, and cops who were either tired of fighting or bought not to care. And still, it kept running. Every week, another body brought to the charity hospital. February 9th. A ball's underway, the music whining, the dancers loose. Then, a fight breaks out. Sam McKeevis, a black man, gets pistol-whipped by another named Marcel Oliver, who promptly vanishes into the crowd. The cops show up after the blood's dried, like they always do. February 24th. A free-for-all erupts. Martin Hamilton gets slashed. His friend James Keith tries to intervene and catches a blade to the shoulder. The attackers escape, but the cops know their names. That's never mattered before. The wounded end up where they all do. Charity. February 25th, third night in a row. A black steamboat roster, Frank Forgy, leaves Matranga's with a man named Martin. They make it a few steps before four men follow them out. One man is beaten unconscious. Forgy is stabbed deep in the lower back, a brutal puncture wound meant to disable a person. 3 men wounded in one night, even for Matranga's, the press said. That's a record. But the doors stay open. That same month, a side story exposes the other side of this operation. Matranga's den wasn't just a slaughterhouse, it was a sanctuary for petty crooks. March 10th, 3 teenage boys, amateur detectives, track a suspected thief named Eli Charles, who's believed to have stolen $100 from his grocer employer. Where do they find him? Right in the middle of Matranga's gambling floor. Officer Matt Sheridan moves in and arrests him for being a minor in a gambling house, one of the few charges they could make stick in a place where everything else slipped through. Come summer, the violence rolls on. July 4th. A Senegambian woman, Teresa Valcour, tells police she was slashed in the neck during a card game at Matranga's. Her attacker, Julius, or Talias King, is arrested. A minor injury. No real headlines, just another blade in the dark. July 17th. The Tiro al Bersaglio, the Italian Sharpshooters Society makes another formal announcement. G. Matranga, ever the loyal secretary, confirms the new physician. Dr. H. A. Vesey. Public respectability on paper. Blood under the floorboards. August 22nd. Another brawl. Another blade. John Thornton is stabbed in the right side by Joseph Phillips. Cops see it happen. Phillips takes off, sprints 6 blocks up Basin Street and disappears. Thornton survives, barely. August 31st. The name that sends a chill. Ed Curtis, convicted criminal, fugitive, escaped from Colonel James's prison camp, and now reportedly spotted walking boldly into Matranga's saloon. No disguise, no shame. He didn't need one. The cops hadn't even been notified of his escape. No wanted posters, no alerts, nothing. Witnesses swear it was him. Then he vanishes again. So here's what you had in 1883. Gunmen, knife fights, fugitives hiding in plain sight, underage gamblers, political connections, and a saloon that refused to die. Tony Matranga's place was no longer a bar or a dance hall. It was a deadfall, a trap designed to lure in the reckless, the desperate, and the dangerous. A hub for violence dressed up as vice. Every stabbing, every shooting, every cop too tired or too crooked to care, all of it added to the legend. And behind it, a name that kept showing up, not in arrest records, but in society notices, obituaries, and Italian community affairs. G. Matranga, signing papers, buying time. This wasn't just about fights anymore. This was infrastructure. This was the roots of something deeper. A family not just surviving, but positioning. And the city? The city let it happen. Because Matranga's deadfall wasn't just protected by brick walls or locked doors. It was protected by politics. New Orleans, 1883 to 1884. The bodies kept stacking up. The knives never stopped flashing. And somehow, Tony Matranga's den was still open. The corner of Basin and Poydras had become more than notorious. It was civic rot, spreading, tolerated, and protected. The newspapers didn't pretend anymore. They called it what it was. Matranga's deadfall. A violent, lawless trap, where the line between dance floor and crime scene disappeared nightly. September 2nd, 1883. A woman named Emma Fields gets caught lifting $3.75 off a man inside the saloon. Officers grab her right at the door. Pocket change, sure. But in a place where men were stabbed weekly, even the pickpockets were drawing blood. March 6th, 1884, the city releases its gambling census, and Matranga's name is officially inked on it. 264 Poydras. A. Matranga, Dice and Monte. 265 Poydras. Another game hall, listed under Roman Obasio. 2 dens. Same corner. Same hellhole. Same family tree. Even cops chasing suspects, like Chief Bachamin's manhunt for a fugitive named Boyd, knew the trail ran through Matranga's. Boyd was last seen entering the saloon, then vanishing into the noise and smoke. Another criminal using Matranga's as cover. Another missed collar. The coldest body on the record belonged to Charles Dyers. 2 years earlier, April 25th, 1882, Dyers had argued with a man named Bob Blinky Williams, a killer with a gimlet knife and no patience for insults. They quarreled inside Matranga's, then took it to the street. Williams stabbed Dyers multiple times, wounds so deep they carved into his spine. Dyers collapsed and died on Rampart and Poydras, just a block from the saloon. Williams vanished. But by mid-1884, the cops caught up with him in St. Louis. Detective Gaster boarded a train to bring him back. 1 corpse, 2 years, and hundreds of bloody nights later. July 17th, 1884. More blood, An Italian Monte dealer named John Lascelles, living with a black woman named Amelia Pittman, gets jealous. They're drinking at Matranga's. He orders her to go home. She says no. He opens a knife and stabs her 3 times in the chest and arms before slipping away into the dark. Police send out a citywide alert. She's alive, barely. Matranga's clientele ran the full spectrum: gamblers, fugitives, runaways, vagrants, prostitutes, killers, and the violent jealous. It was never just about dice. October 7th, 1884. 4 women, Ida Robinson, Lucy Wedlock, Clara Enoch, and Susie Sakis, are fined for fighting in the den. It's not even headline-worthy anymore. Just another day in court. November 7th. The docket reads like a Matranga guest list. Doc Johnson shot Henry Smith. Gets off. No witnesses. Willie Brown, Sam White, Henry Penlin, drunk, disturbing the peace, involved in the same shooting. All were arrested at Matranga's, the paper says. Even the ticket scalpers were connected. Small-timers like A. Ottinger and C. Worth hustling through the same streets, just 1 floor down the criminal hierarchy. And through all of this, through stabbings, shootings, thievery, and riot, no one touches Tony Matranga. No shutdown, no charges, not even a warning. His place is officially listed in the city's gambling registry, with legal recognition of his operation. He's in the books, he's in the business, and he's still hosting the bloodiest party in New Orleans. Matranga's wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. His saloon was a crime scene and sanctuary. His name appeared in Italian civic notices and police blotters in the same week. He hosted murderers one night and society meetings the next. The city knew. The police knew. The press knew. And yet it stayed open. Because the deeper story wasn't about a violent bar. It was about how a family could control a corner, build an empire from it, and survive every knife and badge thrown at them. The Matranga crime syndicate wasn't born in a boardroom or a backroom in New York. It was born right here, at the corner of Poydras and Basin, 1 stab wound at a time. June 5th, 1885. 2 condemned men, Robert Blinky Bob Williams and Foster Chase, were hanged at the parish prison. One murdered out of jealousy in public. The other killed a young girl who refused his advances. Both crimes happened under familiar skies, among the streets and saloons that birthed a generation of violence. One of them, Williams, took a man's life after a confrontation at Tony Matranga's gambling hell. This wasn't the kind of crime that began in the dark. It started with light, with music, dancing, coffee, and familiarity. Charles Dyers, a young mulatto, was drinking coffee with friends Winnie Clark and Francis Moses after a night inside Matranga's saloon, corner of Basin and Poydras, when they ran into Robert Williams. Williams, enraged that Clark, his former lover, was walking with another man, did not speak. He simply drew a knife and stabbed Dyers multiple times, back, abdomen, chest. Dyers collapsed on Rampart and bled to death en route to the hospital. Williams escaped that night. He left Matranga's and vanished into the swamps, literally swimming across rivers and later moving through Texas, Dakota, and St. Louis. But the long arm of the city, led by Detective Gaster, eventually caught up. 2 years after the killing, Williams was brought back to New Orleans. This is Exhibit A, that Matranga's den wasn't just a dance hall. It was a magnet for killers, fugitives, and bloody consequences. Even in his final hours, Williams referred to the killing as less than murder. He blamed Winnie Clark, calling her an ex-convict whose testimony shouldn't count. But the records are clear. The murder started at Matranga's. It was one of many. The rest of this execution day piece is a Gothic portrait of death in Orleans Parish. Foster Chase, the other man hanged that day, shot his sister-in-law Marie-Louise Prevost in the head in a moment of jealous rage. His story is told with tragic clarity. his tears, his remorse, his denial, and his descent into religion in his final days. John Baptiste, the third man originally sentenced to die, was spared at the 11th hour by executive clemency. Even in these ultimate moments, the condemned couldn't help but cast blame. "Some people have luck," said Blinky Bob, sullen in the corner after Baptiste was spared. "The reporters have done me no good," said Chase. "I want to be left alone." "She swore my life away," he added, of his mother-in-law. November 26th, 1885. New Orleans goes up in flames, and with it the house that Vice built. For years the corner of Basin and Poydras had been whispered about in courtrooms, police stations, and saloons. If you lived in New Orleans in the 1880s, you knew the name Tony Matranga. He wasn't a mob boss, not yet, but he was something else. A cobbler-turned-kingpin who built a gambling empire on cheap whiskey, rigged dice, and blood-stained floors. They called it a Negro gambling den in the press, coded language for a place where race, crime, and vice collided in the open. The Times-Democrat didn't mince words. They wrote, "A terribly low place, the scene of many an ugly fight, cutting and shooting scrape, the vicinity so vile that respectability fled in all directions, leaving crime to take possession." This wasn't exaggeration. Murders happened here. Police were bribed here. And yet Matranga kept building. By 1885, he owned or operated at least 3 properties on the block, alongside family members Charles and Anthony Matranga. But no man is untouchable. And no racket lasts forever, especially when nature gets involved. November 25th, 2 in the morning. A fire sparked at 268 Poydras Street. Fueled by high winds and rotting wood, the flames jumped to the corner property, Tony Matranga's saloon and gambling house. It went up like dry paper. Everything burned: the gambling saloon, the bar room, the vile decoctions of liquor, the dice, cards, crepe tables, and roulette wheels, the building itself. Insurance covered some of the loss. Matranga was already rich enough to insulate himself. But what fire insurance couldn't recover was this: the myth of invincibility. This was a place the city had long failed to shut down. They wrote about it. They prosecuted its patrons. But in the end, it was fire, not law, that came for the Matrangas. When dawn came and the firemen doused the last embers, they found something beneath the rubble. A body. Edward J. Murphy, a blacksmith from Ireland, lay face down beneath bricks and collapsed beams. A ring with a harp, the Irish symbol, helped identify him. He had arrived just days before, with $300 in gold strapped to his body. That money was found melted into his flesh. Murphy had been drinking heavily. That night, he passed out drunk in a ground-floor room. The fire, the sirens, the panic, none of it woke him. The building collapsed around him. His skull was crushed, his body roasted alive. He was said to have had a gold chain and watch, the article notes, but none of those articles were found. New Orleans, 1885. Before the Commission, before Appalachian, before the 5 families ever sat down at a table, there were the Matrangas, Sicilian street-level operators with storefront clout and market muscle. And like most power in that city, theirs started with fruit stands, fists, and the neutral ground in front of the Poydras market. Charles Matranga, barely a whisper in the national conversation yet, filed an injunction alongside W.H. Brown to stop the city from ripping down their booths, rickety stands that were more than places of business. They were territory, presence, control. Other merchants nearby, guys like Otto Hellman, A. Mason and Co., A. Oldstein, and M. Goslinki, all white, respectable, legit in the eyes of the city, claimed the Matranga's stalls blocked the view of their stores. An eyesore, sure, but also a threat. They sued for damages, $500 a head, and moved to dissolve the injunction. That was the opening shot. At street level, it wasn't politics or high finance. It was geography. Who got the corner? Who controlled the sidewalk? Who stood where the money changed hands? The Matrangas weren't just selling produce. They were laying down roots. Then came the bodies. July 31st, 1886. Carondelet and Penistone streets. A gang of clumsy burglars, black, poor, desperate, started hitting houses in the early hours. Not pros, just nighthawks, breaking in through windows, grabbing whatever wasn't nailed down. They hit one house and produced 20 cents, some gold studs, and a penknife. Next stop, the home of Peter Dural, a real estate broker. Only this time, the job went sideways. Dural had a pistol and a clear shot. One of the burglars moved in the dark, a silhouette against the blinds. Dural fired once, right through the eye. Instant, no words, just bang, and dead weight on the gallery. His partners ran. The cops found the body with a British Bulldog revolver in his coat, a penknife from the last job, and a bag of junk. Tobacco, voodoo trinkets, a wax candle, and a 6-foot stick with a nail on the end. The kind used to snag clothes without setting foot inside. Nobody came to claim the body. No name, no family. Just a whisper on the street. He'd been seen hanging around a dive on Poydras run by Tony Matranga, Charles' brother. A resort for coloured patrons, gambling, liquor, music, maybe more. The cops asked around. Nobody knew his name, or said they didn't. 3 weeks later, August 20th, Tony Matranga was back in the papers, this time for cold-cocking a man named Lou Taylor. $10 fine or 20 days in the clink. Small-time beef. Next to it, a different story. 3 people. Eli Lamson, Mary Burke, Nora Lawson. Pinched for receiving stolen money. Each out on a $500 bond. The stolen money wasn't tied to Tony, not on paper. But that's how it worked back then. Everything floated in shadows. What was clear? The Matrangas weren't just fruit dealers anymore. They were building something, with fists, booths, and silence. And the city was starting to notice. By the end of the summer of 1886, the name Matranga was starting to move. Not headlines yet, not body counts, but movement, the kind that sticks in a city's throat. On the surface, it looked like community. A brass band marched down the streets of New Orleans, uniforms crisp, drums snapping, horns gleaming under gaslight. It was the Società Italiana Tiro al Bersaglio, an Italian sharpshooters club. They stopped in front of the Times Picayune building to present arms, offering up invitations to a Sunday night blowout at Magnolia Gardens. Pyrotechnics by Professor Grisaffi. Music from a fresh Italian brass band. Respectable, cultural, civil. But look at the names behind it. A Patorno, A. Sidoti, Gius, Di Carlo, Luigi Capuano, Antonino Spano, and then Gius, Matranga. This wasn't a social club. It was a roll call. A few days later, the Picayune listed a 2-story brick house on Poydras between Bassin and Franklin. $3,900, owned by A. Matranga. Right next door, another building got $2,500 worth of general repairs. The Matrangas weren't just renting sidewalk space anymore. They were stacking assets, making quiet moves on real estate that mattered. And the stands, the fruit stalls on the neutral ground outside the Poydras market, were still hot. A habeas corpus petition hit the courts in May 1887. A man named Antonio Deloso, tenant of G. Rizzo, was arrested for blocking access to the market. The city called it obstruction. Deloso called it rent. He held that stand legally, same one the Matrangas had fought over before. And again, the court sided with the tenants, citing Brown versus the city and Matranga vive the city. The judges weren't sentimental, but they understood land. If the neutral ground weren't legally public space, the city couldn't just muscle them off it. Not without a fight. Meanwhile, another name started showing up. G. Matranga, July 1887. Arrested for carrying a concealed weapon. No drama. Pleaded guilty. I posted a $250 bond and walked. But then came October. A fight broke out inside Fabasha's saloon, Royal near Custom House, between two employees, one white, one black. A carving knife got pulled, and Nicholas Cousin sliced up Charles Brown's hand. It wasn't a killing, but it could have been. Cousin was arrested and posted $500 bond. The signer, G. Matranga, number 27 St. Philip Street. This wasn't just family. It was covered. Guys were leaning on Matranga money when they got into trouble. Quiet, but constant. A name on a bond here, a property transfer there. The kind of infrastructure that doesn't headline, but holds everything together when the bullets come later. Then came the voter rolls. In March 1888, the registrar of Orleans Parish released a public notice. Dozens of names had been flagged as possibly fraudulent or illegally registered. People were ordered to appear and explain why their names shouldn't be purged from the books. Line 373, Antonio Matranga, 152 Basin Street. That wasn't a slip. That was a red flag. Somebody inside was watching the Matrangas, watching how deep they were reaching, how fast they were spreading. 2 months later, in May, the Matrangas were back in the real estate columns. Mrs. J. Gazzo sold a lot to F. Matranga, $1,500 for a slice of land on St. Mary near Felicity and Old Magazine. Same zone, same circuit, tightening the grid. They were still a few years from gunfire, a few years from blood on the streets. But by 1888, the Matrangas weren't just surviving in New Orleans. They were embedding. Every booth, every bond, every backroom handshake was part of the machine that would soon rewrite who ran the docks, the markets, the rackets. They weren't the power yet, but they were moving, and the city could feel it. Late summer, 1888. New Orleans. A schooner named Santo Oteri docks at Post 15 in the 1st District, 200,000 coconuts stacked tight in its hull. The fruit's bound for a man named S. Oteri, one of the heaviest importers on the Gulf. The unloading, handled by Charles Matranga and Company. Fast, clean, under 4.5 hours. No wasted motion, no dropped crates. Oteri called it the fastest unload he'd ever seen, and he'd seen plenty. That wasn't just praise. That was a signal. The docks were talking, and the Matrangas were making themselves indispensable. This wasn't the kid with the fruit stand anymore. This was a crew, but power doesn't protect you from death. On October 7th, 1888, Giuseppe Matranga, born in Piano di Grecia, Sicily, dropped dead at 35. He was a member of Società Italiana Tiro al Bersaglio, the same group that had paraded with flags and brass bands just months before. His funeral notice ran in the Times-Picayune, calling for all members, civilian and military, to assemble at the social hall on St. Philip and Dauphine. He was buried with ceremony and with muscle. By early 1889, the names started clustering. March 20th. A birthday party for Joseph Torre at his Bayou Road mansion. But this wasn't cake and candles. It was a loyalty summit. Top-tier Italian names filled the house. John Cefalu, John Macheca, A. Matranga, Estamico, and more. They didn't just show up. They brought custom-made gifts, monogrammed, formal, brotherhood dressed as celebration. These weren't merchants. They were architects, designing a future for Sicilian control in New Orleans with dinners, bands, and real estate deeds. Every handshake mattered. Every name listed meant something. Then, October 13th, 1889, Columbus Day, or at least the Sicilian version of it. 1,500 Italians flooded the streets in one of the biggest ethnic parades the city had ever seen. The brass bands screamed through the French Quarter. Dark-eyed kids ran to catch a glimpse of their fathers in uniform, marching under the flags of Italy and America. 10 societies formed the line: the Italian Union Garibaldi, the Società Tiro al Bersaglio, the Giovanni Bersaglieri, San Bartolomeo, and others. But out front, the man in charge of the whole thing, G. Matranga, Grand Marshal. He wasn't just marching, he was commanding. His aides, James, Caruso, Charles Patorno, R. Geraci, N. Caruso, all names connected, all trusted. And after the parade, the whole crew gathered at Tony Licalzi's on Rampart for champagne and speeches. The table was packed. Charles Matranga, Joe Matranga, Captain S. D'Amico, G. Di Carlo, S. Sunseri, T. Petri, and others. There was no mention of the docks, no mention of who ran the stevedores, no talk of bonds, knives, or contested voter rolls. Just celebration, toasts, brotherhood. But I make no mistake. This was consolidation, visibility, public proof that the Matrangas weren't just some Sicilian family with a few fruit stands and a lucky real estate deal. They were a network, politically wired, culturally entrenched, and economically aggressive. With every parade, funeral, and port job, they were embedding deeper into New Orleans life, the Italian layer of a city already ruled by whispers, not laws. They were still years from the gunfire that would shake the French Quarter, but the ground was already shifting beneath them, and the name Matranga kept showing up. First on docks, then on deeds, and now at the front of the line. May 6th, 1890. New Orleans. The night was quiet, warm, humid, typical for spring in the Crescent City. But by midnight, the stillness near Esplanade and Clayborn exploded into chaos. 25 shotgun blasts shattered the dark. A wagon carrying 6 Sicilian stevedores came under fire. No warning, no shout. Just sudden gunfire, heavy and loud, the kind that echoes down alleys and lingers in the blood. It was a planned hit. No question. Tony Matranga was at the center of it. The wagon belonged to him. A 4-wheeled fruit hauler that doubled as his crew's ride home after night shifts on the docks. They had just finished unloading bananas off the foxhole. A steamer berthed at the levee. As always, Tony's men worked fast, quiet, efficient. They were paid in muscle, not questions. The crew, Tony Lacasia, Rocca Garocchia, Salvador Bosel, Vincent Caruso, Bustiana Cardona, and Tony himself, piled into the wagon and rolled off down Esplanade, laughing, joking, wiping fruit pulp from their hands. The night was normal. The route was routine. They took the same path home each time, passing through the Greek row on Dorgenois, where Sicilian and Greek immigrants crammed into rows of shotgun cottages. But this time, the lights went out. Literally. At the intersection of Esplanade and Clayborn, the electric street lamps blinked off, suddenly, without cause. A blackout timed too perfectly to be coincidence. And just as the wagon hit the middle of the neutral ground, men stepped out from behind the oaks and fences. Shadowy figures, unseen, unnamed. And then, gunfire. Old-school weapons, blunderbusses, smoothbore shotguns that tore flesh wide. They didn't fire bullets, they fired slugs. Ugly metal chunks designed to do damage, not precision. At least 25 shots, all at once. It was an ambush, pure and simple. No one in the wagon had time to pull a weapon. Most didn't even carry one. They dove for cover, bleeding, crawling, trying to drag themselves clear. Cardona, the driver, took a slug to the hip. Lacasia was torn open in the legs. Garocchia and Caruso were hit. Caruso's femur shattered just above the knee. Matranga himself was shot in the leg. The bone snapped clean in two. He nearly passed out before the wagon even slowed. Witnesses said the horse reared and bolted down Clayborn. They finally got it under control near Bayou Road. The wounded were rushed to a local pharmacy, and from there to Charity Hospital. Vincent Caruso, 35, bleeding out on a stretcher, told reporters through clenched teeth, "God knows how many shots. We weren't doing anything, just coming home. I didn't see anyone. Don't know why they did it." But the police knew. This wasn't random. This was Sicilian business. A vendetta. 2 years earlier, the stevedoring docks had turned into a war zone. Control shifted when Tony Matranga's crew muscled out the Provenzano brothers. Another Sicilian outfit, with their own loyalists and their own way of doing things. The Matrangas had undercut prices, worked faster, and played the political angles better. That left the Provenzanos watching their own contracts dry up. It bred bad blood. Now that blood was literal. No one was arrested. No one talked. The wounded gave the police nothing, just silence. It wasn't fear, it was code. Street code. Sicilian code. You didn't speak names to the law. You settled it yourself. Chief Hennessy personally visited the scene. His name would come up again, soon. The doctors called the wounds massive, shredding, mangled. The kind of injuries only Old World weapons could produce. Tools from Sicily, not Bourbon Street. Whatever truce existed on the docks had just been annihilated, and the streets of New Orleans knew the Matrangas were at war. New Orleans, May 7th, 1890. By morning, the city was talking about one thing: the Italian ambush at Clayborn and Esplanade. 3 wounded, 1 leg gone, and an entire neighborhood rattled from the sound of 25 shotgun blasts. Chief of Police David Hennessy didn't waste time. He knew what it was. Everyone did. Not a robbery, not a random street brawl. This was the vendetta, Sicilian scores being settled with American firepower. And Hennessy, sharp and politically wired, knew exactly which doors to knock on. He put the word out. Pick them up. By midday, his men had swept the city. Sergeants Day, Kenny, and Clifton Captains Barrett, Collane, Journey Corporals Boyard, Belost, Hevron, Porteous. They hit multiple locations fast. Guns were recovered. 2 double-barrel muzzle loaders, one still hot, the other loaded with slugs and buckshot. In the wagon, they found a fully loaded Colt revolver, a pair of hats, and pants bundled together, left behind in the chaos. But they wanted names, and they got them. A witness, B. Geraci, brought along Anthony Locascio and identified the shooters, pointed them out cold. Joseph Provenzano, Peter Provenzano, Nick Giglio, Tony Giumbelcaro, Anthony Pellegrini, Gaspardo Romato. Each man was locked up and charged with lying in wait and attempted murder. No bail, straight to parish prison. The violence wasn't new. According to police records, this war had been bubbling for months. At its core, a turf war over stevedoring contracts on the fruit wharves. The Matranga Caruso crew had snatched work out from under the Provenzanos, offering faster labor and tighter prices to the fruit importers. The docks were money. Whoever controlled the banana boats controlled the cash. But Sicilian wars didn't just play out in the daylight. Months earlier, Joseph Provenzano had been shot at outside his grocery on St. Philip and Decatur, said to be by Jim Caruso's boys. He returned fire, and an innocent Frenchman caught a bullet. Provenzano identified several shooters, then refused to testify. Silence. Weeks later, cops found 2 men holed up in an abandoned house near Provenzano's place, heavily armed, waiting. Word on the street, they were there to kill him. Now this. The shooting that shattered Tony Matranga's leg, tore into Salvatore Sonchera, and crushed Vincent Caruso's femur. At Charity Hospital, House Surgeon Miles and his assistant made the call. Matranga's leg had to go. Amputation above the knee. Clean. No chance of saving it. Even in recovery, the blood kept boiling. That afternoon, Corporal Boyard spotted 3 Italians outside the hospital talking low. He followed them onto the Esplanade streetcar. One of them couldn't sit straight. Too stiff. Too tense. Boyard searched him. Found a large revolver tucked under his vest. Loaded and ready. The man gave his name as Lombardo Gustino. Another one carrying heat in daylight. He was booked for concealed weapon possession. The press had its version. We want no modern edition of the Carbonari here. The city must break the back of this vendetta. But it wasn't just about vendetta. It was about control. The Provenzanos had owned the docks. Then the Matrangas came in, faster, hungrier, wired to the street. They were changing the balance of power, and now both sides had tasted blood. Chief Hennessy had made his move. But the question wasn't whether arrests would stop the war. The question was, who would die next? New Orleans, spring 1890. The vendetta was no longer rumor. It was fact, and it was bleeding. Just days after the ambush at Clayborn and Esplanade, 25 shotgun blasts into a wagon full of Italian stevedores. The press had seen enough. The Times Democrat laid it out without restraint. This isn't Sicily. This is the United States. We want no modern edition of the Carbonari here. For the first time, a New Orleans paper publicly called the Italian feud for what it was. Not a brawl, but a society, an underworld war fought with shotguns and silence. And the paper pointed the finger. Matranga versus Provenzano. A rivalry rooted in dock control, fruit contracts, and old country loyalty. And now, 3 men lay wounded, one with a leg amputated, and no one on either side was talking. But the city was done waiting. May 14th, 1890. Louisiana Review. The first names dropped. Gaspardo Romato, Peter and Joe Provenzano, Nick Giglio, Anthony Pellegrini, and Tony Giumbelcaro, all arrested and jailed, no bail allowed. The city said it flat. This was vendetta fallout. Fruit trade rivalry turned war. June 12th, Criminal Court, New Orleans. Judge Guy Drew called the defendants forward. The room was packed. Sicilian spectators, reporters, curious locals. They wanted to see the faces of the men who had laid in wait with blunderbusses in the dark. But the key witnesses, the wounded men, were still missing. Tony Matranga, the stevedore boss. Vincent Caruso, the Palermo man whose femur had shattered under a slug. Salvatore Sonchera, the 3rd victim. All of them still flat on their backs, recovering. Matranga had lost his leg. Caruso couldn't stand. The court read medical letters aloud. No theatrics, just cold facts. Bedridden, incapable of travel. Attorneys clashed. Judge J.C. Walker and John G. McMahon argued for bail. Their clients had been rotting in parish prison for over a month without trial. Prosecution attorneys Lionel Adams and A.D. Enriquez refused to set a date. No witnesses, no case. They'd wait. The judge called a recess. The district attorney never showed. The room simmered with tension. Everyone knew this wasn't just about a shooting anymore. This was about whether law had any weight in the face of a Sicilian blood feud. June 26th, 1890, same courtroom. The defendants were marched in again. The wounded, still absent. Another letter from Coroner Lemonnier confirmed it. Matranga and Caruso hadn't moved. Their condition hadn't improved, still confined to their homes, still unavailable. 2 more state witnesses failed to appear. Judge Drew, cornered by medical delays and legal maneuvering, continued the case. Again. No trial, no release. The accused were remanded to parish prison without bail. But the clock was ticking. In the streets, the tension was tightening like a piano wire. Everyone could feel it. In the saloons, on the docks, in the packed courtrooms. The vendetta hadn't ended in a spray of shotgun pellets. It had only begun. And behind closed doors, both sides were getting ready for what came next. The streets around Esplanade and Clayborn ran red before sunrise. May 7th, midnight. A wagon rolled slow through the dark, carrying 6 men with Sicilian names and iron reputations: Anthony Lacascio, Tony Matranga, Gerarcia, Salvato Sonsera, Vincent Caruso, and Bastian Cardons. They didn't see it coming. A hit team waited in the shadows, guns up, nerves tight. When the wagon passed, they opened fire. Caruso, Matranga, and Sonsera took the worst of it. Blood spilled. Matranga's leg would later be amputated. The rest scattered into the night. Within hours, police had names: Gaspardo Romarto, Peter and Joe Provenzano, Nick Gillio, Anthony Pellegrini, Tony Giumbalcaro. These weren't corner toughs. These were men known to law enforcement, violent, organized, connected. The charge: lying in wait and attempted murder. A vendetta hit, plain and simple. They were picked up fast and locked in parish prison. No bail, no deals. Weeks passed. The wounded stayed in the hospital, too broken to testify. When the court date finally came, July 12th, Recorder Drew's courtroom was packed wall to wall. Tension you could cut with a knife. Defense attorneys John G. McMahon and Judge J.C. Walker were ready to move. The prosecution came with Lionel Adams and A.D. Henriquez, both well-versed in blood-soaked cases. But the witnesses still weren't there. Drew had word from the hospital. None of the 3 shot men were strong enough to appear. The defense pushed hard. Their clients had been inside for over a month. No examination, no bail, no movement. McMahon demanded the trial proceed. Then a stall. The D.A. Lusenberg was called but never showed. 2 hours passed. No answer, no update. Eventually McMahon asked for another continuance. No choice. The prosecution refused to lock in a date. Too risky, without knowing if the witnesses would survive, let alone testify. Drew stepped in. He'd go to the hospital himself, get answers from the doctors. Then, and only then, he'd set a date. The accused were remanded back to parish prison. Behind the legal shuffle, the message was clear. Somebody had ordered a hit. Somebody wanted the Matranga crew out. And somebody else wanted justice, or revenge, from the bench. But in 1890s New Orleans, those two things didn't always mean the same. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The vendetta had moved indoors. The shooting war between the Provenzanos and the Matrangas, the old stevedore kings and the rising muscle, was now playing out under oath. The courtroom on St. Louis Street was packed elbow to elbow with Italians, Irish, Frenchmen, and old-line locals. Some leaned on canes, others leaned on grudges. 12 men made the jury, all white, all male, and every one of them about to hear one of the bloodiest and most politically radioactive trials in the city's recent memory. The charges: Joseph and Peter Provenzano, Nick Giulio, Anthony Pellegrini, Gaspare Lombardo, and Tony Gianforcaro. 6 men accused of lying in wait and ambushing a wagon full of rival stevedores in the early morning hours of May 7th. Guns, blood, and bodies. 3 men wounded, 1 leg amputated. The motive: old work, lost contracts, and Sicilian pride. The first witness was Aimar C. Vallon, a veteran fruit importer. He laid out the background like a financial report. For years, the Provenzanos had exclusive stevedoring contracts on the banana docks. Then they lost it all. The business was handed over to a new crew, Charles Matranga, and John Locascio. From then on, tensions didn't simmer. They boiled. More importers followed. Macheca, Fallon, Oteri. All confirmed the same thing. The Provenzanos had run the show for over a decade. Then they were out, replaced by the Matrangas and their crew. Caruso, Sunzeri, Locascio, Geraci. The old guard felt robbed. Threats were whispered. Faces turned cold. Then came the shooting. Vincent Caruso, still on crutches, entered the courtroom like a ghost, half man, half reminder, his leg wrapped tight, his eyes hollow. He told the jury what happened that night. They were leaving work, riding in a wagon after unloading the Foxhall. Around 12:45 in the morning they hit Clayborn and Esplanade. Suddenly, from the shadows, came a voice in Italian. "There they are. Let's give it to them." Then came the gunfire. Caruso was hit in both legs, crippled for life. He pointed to the men who ambushed them: Joseph Provenzano, Tony Gianforcaro, Lombardo, Pellegrini. He said he saw their faces in the electric light, saw the weapons in their hands. 4 men stepping out of the dark with long guns. 4 names with deadly intent. Tony Matranga followed him in. He'd lost his leg that night. Another stevedore turned soldier. He backed up Caruso's account word for word. He also named Provenzano, Gianforcaro, Pellegrini, and Lombardo. The voice, the flash, the wounds, he was certain. And he had history. Matranga admitted he'd been tried once before, for killing a man in a saloon fight. Acquitted, but not forgotten. More men followed: Geraci, Locascio, Inciardona, Sunzeri. All of them had been in the wagon. All of them told the same story, same shooters, same corner, same blood. But there was more than just witness testimony. Police officers took the stand. They found 2 double-barrel shotguns dumped on Clayborn Street near the neutral ground. One had the breech wrapped in wire, distinctive, memorable. Several witnesses tied that same shotgun to Joseph Provenzano, saying they'd seen it in his possession or stashed on his boat. Then came the Red Light Club. Multiple witnesses testified that just months before the ambush, Provenzano and his crew had held court at the notorious Custom House Street clubhouse. There, they made no secret of their anger. "We've got the people and the law on our side," George Provenzano reportedly said. "It's time to clean the Matranga boys out." According to witness testimony, Gianforcaro replied, "You know I'll stand by you." The prosecution argued this was no random act of street violence. It was a coordinated hit, ordered at the club, fueled by contracts lost and honor bruised. Under oath, several dock bosses said the Provenzano had tried to get their jobs back, lobbying, threatening, begging. They were turned down every time. One boss said they told him directly, "There's going to be a row." He took it seriously enough to remember every word. Even after the Red Light Club reconciliation, supposedly brokered with the police chief's help, where the Provenzanos and Matrangas shook hands in front of witnesses, people in the know didn't believe it would hold. It didn't. There were objections, cross-examinations, accusations of bias and old vendettas. But the facts kept stacking up. The guns matched, the witnesses named names, and the streets didn't forget. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The city was listening, and for once it wasn't just about who controlled the banana docks. It was about who controlled New Orleans. New Orleans, July 17th, 1890, 3rd day. The vendetta trial. By now the case had the whole city watching. Italians packed the courtroom shoulder to shoulder, mixing with fruit merchants, cops, city men, and the curious. It was no longer just a murder trial. It was a referendum on the Italian underworld in New Orleans. Who ran the docks? Who ruled the streets? Who lived and who died? 6 men were on trial for ambush and attempted murder: Joseph and Peter Provenzano, Nick Giulio, Tony Gianforcaro, Tony Pellegrini, Gaspare Lombardo. The charge, lying in wait and opening fire on a wagon full of rival stevedores, the Matranga crew, just past midnight on May 7th. The state had wrapped up its case. Now it was the defence's turn to throw punches. Charles Matranga took the stand, brother of the wounded, boss of the new dock crew. He made it personal. He said Joseph Provenzano had cornered him months earlier and demanded a piece of the business he'd lost. "If you don't let me in, there's going to be bloodshed all along the wharf." Matranga told him the merchants wouldn't have it. Provenzano didn't care. "Then I'll kill the Machecas. I'll kill the Oteris. My mind's made up." Matranga said Gianforcaro threatened him too. Said he'd make mincemeat out of people unless he got in. Charles stood firm. No deal. The defense cross-examined hard, tried to paint Charles as a thug himself, head of a secret society, the Stilettos, a group tied to street justice and Sicilian revenge. He denied it. The alibi machine fired up. Officer Dan Douglas said he saw Giulio and Joe Provenzano at the Eden Theatre after midnight, drinking, calm, unhurried. Officer Mike Early backed it up. So did Sergeant Cooper, who said he saw Provenzano there at 12:16 in the morning, and added, "It would have taken at least 15 to 20 minutes to get from Royal Street to the shooting site at Clayborn and Esplanade. Too tight a window." Witness after witness said the same. They were at the theatre. They were on Royal Street. They were nowhere near the ambush. Dora Sherman, Minnie Wallace, Minnie Arnold, and several others, some waitresses, some close friends, testified that Joe Provenzano and Giulio never left the theatre from midnight to 2 in the morning. Then came the curveball. Officer Thezan, a cop on duty near the crime scene, testified the electric light wasn't even working that night. Said it was so dark that women asked him to escort them across the street. Moon or not, he didn't think anyone could have identified faces from 30 feet away. He also said that when he asked the wounded men who shot them, they said they didn't know. Captain Barrett, another officer, visited Matranga in the hospital, asked him straight up, "Do you know who shot you?" Matranga, "Don't ask me. I'm too sore." Corporal Seelhorst, Sergeant Clifton, Corporal Woodworth, all confirmed the same thing. The men in the wagon said they didn't know who fired on them. Then the defense called the accused. Joseph Provenzano took the stand. He denied everything. Said he was at Pellegrini's shop around midnight. Then went to Schönhausen's. Then the Eden Theatre, arriving by 12:15. He claimed he was there until nearly 2 in the morning. He denied owning a shotgun, especially the wired one tied to the shooting. Denied threatening Charles Matranga. Denied being anywhere near Esplanade and Clayborn. He admitted having past beef with James Caruso, but said it was settled, never went to trial. He said the gun that witnesses swore was his had never been in his store, never been in his life. He swore on it. More defense witnesses stepped in to support the alibis. Landro said Pellegrini was at his house all night. Emma and Marie Lombardo, daughters of Gaspare Lombardo, swore he never left the house. Cristoforo Russo, a barber, and Bassio Comardi confirmed seeing Lombardo in the shop late. Isaac, a black stable hand, testified that Gianforcaro was home tending mules at midnight. Even a deaf mute, interpreted by Peter Provenzano, said he saw Joe Provenzano and Giulio in the theatre at 2 in the morning. The judge didn't allow it, but the implication was made. Then the state took one more swing. They brought back Officer Thezan, who said he heard the gunfire himself. Said shots came from both sides, the neutral ground and the wagon. That was the dagger. Because if the Matrangas fired back, they had guns ready. And if they had guns ready, was it really an ambush? That's what the jury had to decide. The tension snapped at 7:30 at night. In court, Tony Pellegrini stood and accused a juror, D.O. O'Malley, of making signals to juror Kaufman. Judge Baker kicked O'Malley out of the courtroom and warned everyone, no games, no tricks, no whispers. By 11:22 p.m., court adjourned for the night. But the battle lines were drawn. Two narratives. One, verdict. One side said it was a cowardly ambush by a bitter crew who lost their grip on the docks. The other said it was a setup, a story crafted by wounded men who changed their tale after the fact. This was more than just a gang war. This was about control of the wharves, the courts, and the city itself. It was 3 minutes to midnight when Judge Baker gave the charge to the jury. 11 hours of testimony, 2 hours of closing arguments, 50 witnesses, 6 men on trial for attempted murder by ambush, and a packed courtroom that hadn't blinked in days. Before court adjourned, each of the accused was ordered to stand and face the men who would decide their fate. One by one, Joseph and Peter Provenzano, Nick Giulio, Tony Gianfocaro, Anthony Pellegrini, Gaspare Lombardo. The jurors studied their faces. Then the 6 were led back to parish prison. The jury locked in. It was over, or just beginning. That final day in court was pure theatre. The last of the accused took the stand in their own defence, one by one, repeating the same narrative. Wrong place, wrong time, wrong men. Anthony Pellegrini swore he was home in bed by 10, tending to a sick baby. Yes, he'd shot a man once, Charles Camp, but he said it was over the honour of his family. He would do it again. Nick Giulio said he spent the night at the Eden Theatre. Women like Dora Sherman and Minnie Wallace backed his story. So did his alibi buddy Joe Provenzano, who was also at the theatre, at least according to them. Peter Provenzano claimed he never had bad blood with the Matrangas. I never owned a shotgun, never saw one in the store, and he ran with his brother. Said he was with friends that night, and in bed by 10. Gaspare Lombardo, the old banana hauler, spoke through a translator. Protestant, father of 10, 25 years in the city. Swore he was home on Melpomene Street by nightfall. Said he was too old and too tired to be stalking men through dark streets. Tony Gianfocaro gave a Baron Street streetcar alibi. Said he passed George Catanzaro's oyster stand on his way home, fed the mules, and went to bed. They all denied it. Every man said the same thing. I wasn't there. I don't hold grudges. I don't do vendettas. Then came the character parade, the old trick. Dozens vouched for the men's reputations, friends, barkeeps, merchants. Most had no idea what the men did behind closed doors, but told the court they seemed quiet, peaceful, honest. It didn't land clean. The prosecution fired back in rebuttal. A 13-year-old boy, Antonio de Forges, testified that he found a pistol on the neutral ground near the crime scene, a large, old-fashioned muzzle-loading handgun. He brought it home. His father gave it to police. Several witnesses later identified it as belonging to George Provenzano, a brother of 2 of the accused. No direct connection, but the implication hung heavy. Jim Caruso, brother of wounded Vincent Caruso, swore he'd seen the pistol before. Said he used to carry it for George in bundles on the dock. One day he got curious, unwrapped the cloth, and found the gun inside. Anthony Manfrey, who ran an oyster bar on Custom House Street, said Giulio had approached him after the shooting, not for oysters, but to craft an alibi. Told him exactly what to say on the stand. The state rested. The defense fired back. Hard. They called Joseph Provenzano again to deny the pistol belonged to his family. He said it looked like one carried by an employee named Palazzoli. Another redirection. Another deflection. The jury watched it all. Impassively. They saw the cracks. They heard the contradictions. They saw a pattern of tight stories told too perfectly. Closing arguments pulled no punches. Lionel Adams, ex-DA, slammed the alibis. called them fruitful sources of perjury, quoting the Chief Justice of Massachusetts. He said this wasn't just about one night, it was about stopping imported blood justice before it took root in American soil. "Do you want Sicilian vendetta grafted onto American law?" he asked the jury. "Do you want midnight assassinations becoming the new way of settling scores?" J.M. Pratt, for the defense, stayed brief, kept it clean, pointed out the holes in the investigation, called it lazy work by lazy cops. James McMahon went heavy on emotion. He called the defendants Americanized, working men. He painted them as victims of ethnic prejudice, hard labor Sicilians made scapegoats for a gang war the cops didn't understand and didn't want to touch. They would go to the police, he said, not to the gun. Then came Assistant D.A. John Finney to close it all out. His tone was final. He told the jury the city had failed over and over to hold these men accountable. He said vendetta killings had gone on too long, and if the jury didn't stop them now, it would never stop. "This country is broad," he said, "but there's no room here for vendetta law." July 19th, 1890, 11:57 at night. The jury retired. The courtroom emptied. The 6 accused were locked up. The crowd was told to go home. But no one really did. Not in the quarter, not on the docks, not in City Hall, because everyone knew what came next. This was no longer about guilt or innocence. It was about who the city would believe, and who the city would fear. July 23rd, 1890. The next domino falls. Rocco Geraci, a key witness for the state, who had named names in open court, suddenly turned himself in. The charge, murder. The victim, Vincent Raffo. Date of the killing, December 12th, 1886. Until now, Geraci had been in the wind. Most figured he'd skip town. Instead, he pulled up to the courthouse in a carriage, flanked by lawyers Lionel Adams and A.D. Henriquez, the same pair who had just prosecuted the Provenzanos. It was a surgical move. Geraci was booked, arraigned, and remanded to parish prison without bail. Trial date set for Saturday the 26th. Same courtroom, same judge, same shadows. Sheriff LeBlanc ordered him isolated immediately. All 6 of the convicted men from the vendetta case were separated from each other. And from Geraci. Why? Because everyone knew what Geraci had done. He talked. And in this world, talking could kill you. New Orleans, August 1890. The city wanted blood. Instead, it got a new trial. Judge Baker, the same man who had presided over the Provenzano-Matranga vendetta case, threw the whole verdict out. All 6 men would get another shot at freedom. Why? Because Baker didn't trust the conviction. It started with the grand jury. They'd been asked to look into claims that the police botched the investigation, held back, failed to act, maybe even tried to shield the accused. But on August 6th, the grand jury cleared them. No dereliction of duty. That same week, inside Baker's courtroom, something else was happening. The defense had filed a motion for retrial. New evidence, they said. Flawed jury selection. Testimony that didn't add up. A juror, they claimed, had lied to get on the panel. It wasn't just courtroom posturing. Baker was listening. He wanted the truth, or something close to it. So, he went to the crime scene himself, Esplanade and Clayborn, where the wagon was ambushed that night in May, where Tony Matranga lost his leg, where bullets tore into the carriage and left men screaming in the dark. Baker walked it alone, looked at the gaslight on the corner, counted the trees. 5 rows of them, leafy and thick, filtering what tiny light there was. He asked himself the same question over and over. Could a man, standing under those trees, be clearly identified at midnight? His answer was no. On August 10th, Baker laid it all out in court. At 10:30 in the morning, he took the bench. The 6 men, the Provenzano crew, stood again at the bar, just like they had weeks before when the jury handed down guilty. Now the judge was ready to tear that verdict apart, point by point, brick by brick. Recognition. 4 Matrangas swore they could identify the shooters. But Baker said the lighting made that impossible. Even if one of them picked out Lombardo and another saw Giulio and Peter Provenzano, the circumstances made it unreliable. Alibis. The judge said Giulio's alibi was rock solid. If he were eating fried oysters at Manfred's saloon after midnight, he couldn't have been lying in wait with a shotgun just minutes earlier. As for Peter Provenzano, the testimony of several uninterested policemen, men with no stake in either side, cast enough doubt to make the conviction shaky. The timeline. Ambulance records proved the wounded were picked up around 12:30. That made the defense's time estimates more believable. The attack couldn't have happened before midnight. That alone narrowed down the window and gave credibility to several of the alibis. Witness contradiction. One of Lombardo's daughters said she was up sewing after midnight. The other said she wasn't. That contradiction, Baker said, weakened both accounts. Vendetta versus confusion. The judge questioned whether the victims really saw their attackers, or just thought they did. They were surprised, wounded, panicked. Afterward, reporters, cops, and others talked to them. Their story evolved. They originally suspected 13 people. Eventually, they narrowed it to 6. But Baker saw that shift for what it was. Guesswork hardened into certainty. The defense called it a frame-up born from fear. The state said it was justice for the vendetta. Baker said it was neither. What he saw was a bad conviction. He didn't say the Provenzanos were innocent. He just said the state hadn't proved they were guilty. It is not pleasant to waste the time or repeat a trial, he told the court, but the verdict is not sustained by the evidence. I am compelled to order a new trial. Just like that, 6 men who were staring down decades behind bars were thrown a lifeline. The courtroom gasped. The press scrambled for headlines. And the city, still raw from what came before, knew this wasn't the end. It was the calm before something worse. Because the next time the city wouldn't wait for a verdict. It would make its own. October 15th, 1890. New Orleans. October 15th, 1890. New Orleans. Superintendent David C. Hennessy took 6 shotgun blasts to the body. The man who had policed the vendetta wars, who knew the names, the faces, the alliances, was gunned down on his own doorstep. The shots tore through the night air just after 11 at night. He made it to a neighbor's steps, bleeding, gasping, still holding his revolver. He'd emptied 3 rounds back at the shadows. When Captain William O'Connor reached him, Hennessy said 5 words. They gave it to me. Dagos. He didn't mean Sicilians. He meant those Sicilians, the ones in the street wars, the ones in the banana trade, the ones the newspapers didn't need to name anymore. The hit was clean, professional, a setup. 2 double-barreled shotguns hidden in an alley near Basin and Giraud. As Hennessy reached his front door, the barrels flared in the dark. First volley, then another. Buckshot ripped through his chest and leg. His coat looked like it had been fed through a meat grinder. Slugs pierced his lungs. One lodged near his heart. He drew and fired, but the shooters were already moving. Witnesses scrambled. Cops flooded the block. Officer Krapp ran toward the sound. He saw 3 men disappearing into the dark. 2 down Franklin Street, 1 out Giraud, heading toward the basin and the woods beyond. Officer John Lanigan, posted near the lumber yards, had a face-to-face encounter. A tall man in a derby hat passed him first. "Me no know," the man said when asked about the gunfire. Behind him, came two more, one with a short shotgun under his coat. They vanished between stacks of timber, but they left footprints, long and heavy, and a muzzle-loaded double-barreled shotgun, still warm, dumped in the gutter on Franklin Street. The order came from Mayor Shakespeare. Scour the neighborhood. Arrest every Italian you find. Do it again at first light. By 2 o'clock in the morning, police had already locked up 6 suspects. Antonio Marchesi, 35, fruit vendor. Gasparo Marchesi, his son, just 11. Peter Mostero, Italian shoemaker, whose alley may have been the ambush point. Zachary Foster, black laborer, held as a witness. A. Bagnetto, vendor caught with a revolver. Others unnamed rounded up from beds and fruit stalls. The hospital was chaos. Hennessy's friends, cops, and political allies crowded the amphitheatre ward. The mayor arrived. So did Police Commissioner Bean. Priests administered last rites. Dr. Bloom examined the wounds. 4 major shots to the chest, 1 to the arm, 1 to the leg. The worst had torn through both lungs and stopped near his heart. He whispered to his mother, telling her he was fine. He wasn't. The timing couldn't have been worse, or more convenient. Just weeks earlier, the Provenzano trial had been blown open. Judge Baker tossed the verdict, questioned the lighting, the identifications, the motives. A new trial was coming. Everyone expected Hennessy to testify. He hadn't taken the stand before, but insiders knew he had damaging information. About the vendetta, about the companies, about which cops were dirty. Now, he was shot before he ever got the chance. The press immediately tied it to the Matranga-Provenzano war. Cops said the Matrangas were eating at Fabace's restaurant that night. Alibis. Witnesses. But suspicion was spreading. The Times-Picayune made it clear this wasn't just a gang hit. This was an assassination meant to stop something big. The Provenzanos had beat the charges. The Matrangas were rising in the banana docks. Hennessy had spent years working both sides, watching who paid whom, keeping tabs on who was really pulling strings down at the ports. And now, the only man who knew all of it, the blue-eyed, iron-nerved Irish cop who'd locked up Esposito and infiltrated the old Italian societies, was dying on a hospital gurney. One more thing. Before he collapsed, he said it again. Dagos. He wasn't giving a slur. He was naming suspects. And everybody in the city, the politicians, the cops, the mafia men, the fruit brokers, and the reporters, knew exactly who he meant. This wasn't over. This was only the beginning. New Orleans, October 16th, 1890. David Hennessy didn't go down easily. Even with his gut shredded by buckshot, lungs filling with blood, and death crawling in, he still stared it down. Still believed he could beat it. Lying in the dim quiet of Charity Hospital, the 35-year-old chief of police fought like hell. The men around him, cops, commissioners, politicians, stood helpless while surgeons tried to put him back together. Doctors Bloom and Logan kept vigil, administering morphine, draining wounds, whispering odds they knew were shrinking. At his bedside was Captain William Beanham, the closest thing Hennessy had to a brother. He asked, "You got anything to say?" Hennessy replied, "I'm all right. I'm not going to die. I'm going to get over this." He said it again, even when the color drained, even when the priest arrived, even when they sent for his mother. She came fast, pale, stricken, clenching rosary beads. Hennessy smiled, kissed her hand, and lied like a son who didn't want his mother to know she'd already lost him. He wasn't rich, but he'd saved, invested, and left everything to her. Then he slipped into sleep. A clean death. No gasps, no cries, just a final breath and a whisper to Mrs. Logan, "I'm all right." That was the end of David C. Hennessy, New Orleans' youngest police chief, the man who made enemies on both sides of the badge, the man who once said, "You don't clean up a city like this without stepping on some toes." They ambushed him in the dark. A quiet stretch on Girod Street, near Franklin. The Italians had been watching him for days. 2 volleys rang out from behind fences and alleys. He tried to draw but collapsed. Still, he fired back. Witnesses say he got off 2 rounds before collapsing on Mrs. Gillis's steps. That's where Sergeant McCabe found him. "Who did this?" he asked. "The day goes," Hennessy said. The city turned into a manhunt. Cops raided the Italian quarter like an occupying army. By nightfall, over 40 suspects were in custody. Antonio Scafidi, Antonio Bagnetto, Bastiano Incardona, fruit dealers, shoemakers, fishermen. Most were connected to Tony Matranga, whose oyster saloon on Poydras was ground zero for New Orleans' Sicilian underworld. One witness, Toby Peeler, a house painter, saw it all from his window. He pointed out Bagnetto and Scafidi from a lineup. A fruit dealer turned gunman. That was New Orleans in 1890. Bagnetto had a revolver when picked up. He offered it to the officer. "Take this pistol and keep it for yourself," he said. "You'll make as good a friend of me as a brother." The weapons were everywhere. Muzzle loaders, sword-offs, handguns under floorboards, buried in gutters. One shotgun was found in a gutter on Julia Street, coated in mud but still loaded. Another turned up at a gun store, dropped off a day earlier by a heavy-set man who spoke broken English. At Giro and Rampart, buckshot had torn through walls, shattered glass, and ripped through sleeping quarters. A mother and 2 children missed death by inches. The next morning, the casket, a polished mahogany box lined with white silk, was carried to the Hennessy cottage. His mother sat beside it in silence. She didn't cry, just stared. At City Hall, black crepe hung from every doorway. Police headquarters draped Hennessy's portrait. Telegrams came from Chicago, New York, Pinkerton's, and Scotland Yard. Some pledged flowers, others pledged revenge. Mayor Joe Shakespeare issued a proclamation. "Every effort must be put forth to find and bring to swift punishment these assassins, alike your chief, the public safety, and your city's fair fame." The deeper cops dug, the more it looked organized. Not a vendetta, a contract. The Italian families were split. Matranga versus Provenzano. Hennessy had taken sides. That was his mistake. Some said he took money. Others said he just hated what the Mafia was doing to the docks. Either way, he got too close. The word was that 5 men were chosen. They stalked him, using a cobbler's shop as cover. The shoemaker, Antonio Marchesi, claimed innocence, but his store had a perfect view. Detectives recovered a cache of weapons from Marchesi's shop and others connected to the Matranga crew. Another lead brought them to Mobile, where 2 suspects, George Nagel and Ellens Roman, showed up asking for a candy peddling license. They claimed innocence, but one slipped, "Me see man shoot." The public wanted blood. The phrase, "the day goes, did it," was on every lip. At the parish prison, guards doubled. Watchmen were issued shotguns. Files wrapped in trousers were intercepted, supposedly for making toothpicks. The mayor kept pressure on. The funeral was arranged with military precision. Mounted police, firemen in dress, the Louisiana Athletic Club, state officials, all lined up. The route stretched from Giro to Metairie Cemetery. They buried him in a temporary tomb. His mother would build something better. That would come later. For now, the city wanted justice, or something that looked like it. The trials were coming. And then, retribution. The city of New Orleans was already a pressure cooker. Gangs were dividing up the waterfront. Stevedore jobs, protection rackets, fruit shipments, everything had a price and a gang behind it. And at the center of the storm was Chief of Police David Hennessy. He'd made enemies. Dangerous ones. the kind that didn't forgive and didn't forget, especially not when they thought someone had flipped. On October 15th, 1890, Hennessy was gunned down outside his home. Multiple shooters. No masks. They came in hard and fast, shot him full of holes, and vanished before anyone could lift a hand. He lingered in the hospital just long enough to mumble the ignition point for one of the bloodiest chain reactions in the city's history. The Dagos got me. Within days, the city was locked down. The cops were rounding up Italians in bulk, stevedores, fruit importers, barbers, peddlers, anyone with a vowel at the end of their name. If you were connected to Charles Matranga, the so-called king of the docks, you were dragged in. But even in a city with blood on its cobblestones, what happened next hit like lightning. On October 18th, local reporter Thomas Duffy, whose brother was a known prize fighter, walked into the parish prison. He said he needed to identify one of the suspects. Antonio Scafidi, a soldier in the Matranga camp, was brought into the corridor. Before the jailer could blink, Duffy pulled a pistol and put a round in Scafidi's throat. That wasn't a hit. That was vengeance. Duffy didn't run. He didn't plead. "I saw Hennessy's coffin," he said. "That was enough." Scafidi lived just long enough to start talking. One line blew it wide open. "We knew Chief Hennessy and the Provenzano were friends, and we and Matranga—" Then a priest entered. Confession over. Scafidi died with the rest still in his throat. That one line was all the cops needed. John Matranga, a.k.a. Caramba, was arrested. Over 40 more followed. Lonetto Socconetti, Antonio Bagnetto, named as triggermen. Rostito Incardino, allegedly in the Matranga wagon when they got lit up by the Provenzano crew, was picked up too. The Mafia war wasn't new. Hennessy knew all about it. That was the problem. He'd been scheduled to testify for the Provenzanos in their feud against the Matranga's feud already marked by bodies. He knew the structure. He knew the players. He knew who gave the orders. That knowledge got him killed. The press fanned the flames. New Orleans boiled. Names came fast. Joseph P. Macheca, wealthy importer, politically connected, turned himself in. Claimed innocence. Said he paid respects at the coffin. Cried in court. But there were whispers. At Faberge's, just hours after the murder, Macheca was allegedly overheard telling Matranga and others, "I did all I could." My only regret is they didn't do the job altogether. 2 women picked him out in a lineup, said he was the man who rented a shanty under the alias Peter Johnson, the same shack used as a base. He denied it. They didn't blink. Gold chain. Cigarette trembling in his hand. More names. Frank Romano, known as Nine-Fingered Frank. Vendetta baggage, said to be trouble when drunk. Walked in and surrendered. Charles Patorno did the same. The Provenzanos, meanwhile, had their own story. Already behind bars, Joe and Peter Provenzano, Nick Giulio, Tony Pellegrini. They said Hennessy was their ally. Joe Provenzano told jailers, Hennessy was going to blow the whole thing open. He knew what Matranga and Gerazzi were. He spoke of a secret society, Stop a Guerra, a mafia arm in Carrollton, run like a death cult, black robes, skulls, blood oaths. New recruits swore over a dagger and a skull, kill or be killed. 300 men in New Orleans alone, not just fruit movers, killers. To the Provenzanos, Hennessy's murder wasn't vendetta, it was damage control. They named names, Rocco Gerazzi, Salvador Sunzeri, James Caruso. Said 2 witnesses were already dead. First Vitrano, then Hennessy. By October 19th, police were working overtime. Detectives watched docks, ferries, rail yards. A tugboat headed for open water was stopped and searched. Macheca wasn't on it, but they thought he might have been. More names came in. Peter Monastero, Antonio Scafiro, Bastian Incardona, Loretta Lecorettis, Louis Tarmino, all indicted, all facing charges. The press tried to cool the fire, but it was too late. Thousands had viewed Hennessy's body as it lay in state. Whispers said the Mafia had targeted the mayor next. One old woman told police she overheard, "The mayor goes next." Then Captain Beanham. That warning reached City Hall. The Italian consul condemned the arrests as persecution. The city called it justice. Macheca insisted on his innocence, said he had alibis, witnesses, but the cracks showed. One witness saw him running through back streets at 4 a.m. after the chief was hit. Others said they heard what he said after leaving Fabaccia's. Regret, not for the killing, but for not finishing the job. The Provenzanos painted a bigger picture. Nationwide structure, San Francisco, New York, Chicago, St. Louis, soldiers, not longshoremen. By the end of the week, over 60 Italians were behind bars. Some were guilty, some just looked the part. The line was gone. The fuse was lit. The murder of Chief Hennessy didn't just leave a body in the street, it lit a match under New Orleans politics. And when the fire reached City Hall, Mayor Joseph Shakespeare didn't duck. He wrote a war cry. On Saturday, October 18th, 1890, at a special session of the City Council, Shakespeare's statement was read aloud like scripture. He called it what it was, a hit by the Mafia. A murderer syndicate had stepped beyond vendetta and buried a cop. No community can exist with murder societies in its midst, he wrote. These societies must perish, or the community itself must perish. He wasn't just talking to officials. He was talking to everyone, even innocent Italians who now felt the walls closing in. The mayor wasted no time. He called for the creation of a committee of 50, businessmen, politicians, lawyers. Their job? Root out the Mafia. No warrants, no grand juries, just questions, cash, and civic rage. They raised $1,000 by day's end. They were aiming for $50,000. They wanted names, instigators, not just button men. And they didn't care who flipped. That same day, more suspects rolled in. Macheca, Frank Romero, Charles Patorno. Macheca had already been identified by a woman who said he rented the ambush cottage. He denied it. She didn't. Then Charles Trabina, a field hand. A porter from Grace Church claimed, "We got him," Trabina said after the shots. He was arrested. More threats followed. Anonymous letters. Mayor Shakespeare got one. So did Judge Baker. Even cops were targeted. Nobody was laughing. The streets quieted, not from peace, but fear. Italians kept their heads down. Even the innocent felt hunted. The cops stayed locked on one theory. Mafia hit. Vendetta escalated. Here's how it went. The Provenzanos and Matrangas weren't cinematic gangsters. They were stevedores, labor contractors, fruit ship bosses. The Provenzanos had the contracts. Then they lost them, to Matranga. A payback hit followed. Provenzanos arrested, convicted, then granted a new trial. That trial would have featured one witness, David Hennessy. He had the goods, on Mafia ties, dock rackets, and the money trail. And then he was dead. Joe Provenzano was blunt. Matranga, sure, because Hennessy was going to expose them. He got stuff from Italy. He knew who ran the show. They named Rocco Geraci, James Caruso. They spoke of Stop a Guerra group with 20 leaders, 300-foot soldiers. If you didn't kill when told, you got killed. The cops kept finding weapons, sawed-off shotguns rigged to fold under coats, modified breeches. All Italian-made, all brutal. 10 years earlier, they used knives. Crept up, opened a throat, stabbed again and again. Tossed a hat in your face. Slit your belly before you screamed. But those days were over. Now it was lead. The killers were silent. the victims even more so. Now, for the first time in American history, it wasn't just vendetta, not Black Hand, not secret society. This time, they called it what it was, Mafia. And it didn't start in New York. It started here, New Orleans, with the murder of a police chief and a war that was just beginning. The pressure in New Orleans was reaching a breaking point. Chief Hennessy was dead shot down in front of his home. The city was on edge, the mayor under threat, judges receiving death letters, witnesses too scared to walk alone. And the word Mafia, once whispered in Sicilian backrooms, was now in headlines across the country. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was war. October 21st, 1890. Witness A.J. Peeler, who saw the shooting from his gallery, walked into City Hall looking over his shoulder. He'd received threats. So had the mayor. So had Judge Baker. The message was clear. Stop the investigation or die. Mayor Joseph Shakespeare tried to calm the city, but he knew what he was facing. A network built on fear and blood. The Committee of 50 wasn't just investigating anymore. They were hunting. The arrests came fast. 40 Italians were hauled in from a grocery on Burgundy and Conti, new arrivals from Chicago. No money, no homes. They were meeting at Carlo Graffero's shop, where a man spoke to them in Italian. Police called it unlawful assembly. No charges, just suspicion. Then came Manuel Pietro, identified as the man who fired the fatal shot. Police named him, along with Antonio Scafidi, Mastero, Bagnetto, and Incardona, as the core hit team. The murder, they said, was planned from the Mastero house, rented by Joseph Macheca under the alias John Peterson. A strategic location. Macheca paid the rent in cash, in advance. At the time of the hit, Macheca and the Matrangas claimed they were eating dinner at Fabace's. That was their alibi. But by 4 in the morning, witnesses placed Macheca in the rear of the city with 2 other Italians in slouch hats. The timing didn't sit right. Police made it official. They believed the Matranga faction ordered the hit. The motive? The old stevedore feud. The Provenzanos lost their contracts to the Matrangas, then were blamed for an ambush. They were convicted until granted a retrial. The key witness? Hennessy. He had documents from Italy. He was ready to testify. So they silenced him. Inside the parish prison, the Provenzanos started talking. Matranga sure, Giovanni Provenzano said. He claimed Hennessy had dirt on Matranga and top enforcer Rocco Geraci. They described a structure, not just a gang, but a society. Stoppaguera, also called the Mafia. 20 leaders, 300-foot soldiers, greenhorns brought from Sicily, loyal, desperate, and expendable. Orders came down, targets were assigned. Payment ranged from $10 to $100. Refuse, and you'd be killed. 2 witnesses were already dead. One was Hennessy, the other Vitrano, stabbed before he could testify that he was with Pellegrini the night the Matrangas were attacked. Tony Caruso, a former member, claimed he was inducted in a candle-lit room, black masks and skulls on the table. Swore an oath. Said Matranga was the president, Geraci the enforcer. Caruso refused to kill and barely escaped with his life. The Provenzanos painted a secret world. They meet anywhere. Out near the levee, back of town, sometimes Carrollton. They make the greenhorns do the killing. If you're new, you do what you're told, or you disappear. The weapons told their own story. 3 sawed-off shotguns recovered, 17-inch barrels, folding breeches, carried under coats with quick-release hooks, not hunting guns. Execution tools. Before guns, they were knives. The old method, arm around the neck, head back, jugular sliced. Or a hat thrown in your face before a blade to the belly. Victims often stayed loyal. One man, gutted and bleeding, threw his arms around his killer and said, He's my friend. Police believed they had their shooters, their planners. But belief wasn't justice. Not in 1890. Not in New Orleans. Late October 1890. The headline screamed, "The Mafia. Fresh murders plotted. Mayor next." The killing of Chief Hennessy had become a civic crisis. The police had suspects. The public had rage. The city's leaders were being targeted. A J. Peeler begged for protection. So did Mayor Shakespeare's family. But Shakespeare didn't flinch. These societies must perish, or the community itself must perish. The Committee of 50 raised another $1,000 that week, working toward a $50,000 war chest to destroy what they called assassination leagues. Suspects kept coming in. Matranga, identified as the man who rented the sniper's nest. Charles Trabina, picked out by a church porter who heard him say, "We've got him," after the shots. Manuel Pietro, said to have fired the fatal round. The alleged team, Scafidi, Mastero, Bagnetto, Incardona, Pietro, and 2 still unidentified. On Sunday, police raided Carlo Graffero's grocery. 40 more Italians recently arrived, no jobs or homes, held as suspicious characters. No explanation, just fear. Now the term Mafia was everywhere, not vendetta, not the Black Hand, structure, rank, enforcement. The Provenzanos laid it bare. Matranga was the head. Geraci, the military. 20 at the top, hundreds below. Greenhorns did the killing. Refuse, and you vanished. One demand letter called for $1,000, delivered by James Caruso, who claimed to have seen Matranga in full ritual garb. Black mask, candle-lit skull, blood oath. Caruso backed out when asked to kill. That marked him. The murder of Hennessy, the Provenzanos said, wasn't personal. It was professional. Hennessy knew too much. He was about to testify. So, they ended him. Police kept recovering weapons. One shotgun was hooked inside a coat, 17 inches long, collapsible, designed to be drawn, fired, dumped. All Italian-made. The knife still lingered in memory. One move. Neck, then belly. Sometimes a kiss before death. Even then, victims refused to name names. It wasn't just who killed Hennessy. It was who ordered it. Matranga, Matranga, someone higher. Nearly everyone agreed it was authorized. And that meant something bigger was at work. For the first time in America, the Mafia wasn't just suspected. It was named. And it didn't debut in New York or Chicago. It started here. New Orleans, with a murdered police chief, and a war that was only just beginning. Chief of Police David Hennessy was dying on the steps of his home. He was 33, riddled with bullets. His lungs were blown open. His coat torn by blasts that missed flesh but shredded fabric. Someone still wanted him dead, even as he bled out. It was past midnight. Rain masked footsteps and muffled shots. Hennessy had turned the corner toward his door and walked into a coordinated ambush, blunderbusses and pistols blazing from alleyways and stoops. He fired back, standing his ground. But they had cover, numbers, and the benefit of planning. The men vanished, dropped their guns, melted into the night. The first officer to respond took a bullet to the ear. By the time help reached the chief, he was slumped on the doorstep. It was a hit, a statement. More than vengeance. It was about power. 2 days later, in parish prison, one alleged shooter, Antonio Scafidi, was visited by Thomas Duffy, brother of a former prizefighter. Duffy told deputies he could identify one of the Dagos who'd killed Hennessy. Scafidi leaned in. Duffy pulled a revolver and fired point blank. Scafidi collapsed. Duffy didn't resist. "If the Italian dies," he said, "I'm willing to hang. I only wish there were 75 more like me." Scafidi was rushed to Charity Hospital. Judge M.C. Bringer arrived with an assistant. They asked if he had anything to say. We knew Hennessy and the Provenzanos were good people. We were friends of the Matrangas. I'm innocent. My idea is the Matrangas did it to keep the Provenzanos in jail. Oh my God, I'm going to die. Then silence. Over 50 men were arrested, all Italians. The city flooded with rumors, threats, and vendettas. Another suspect, Pedro Natal, was picked up after an officer swore he saw him fleeing the scene. But the police had more than theories. They had a timeline. The killing wasn't random. It was calculated. A mafia job. The boldest in a long chain of bloodlettings tied to the Matranga-Provenzano feud. A war for control of the docks and fruit trade. In June, a hit squad ambushed the Matrangas, left them riddled with bullets. 6 men were arrested. Then a key witness was gunned down in daylight. The case collapsed. A new trial was ordered. That's when Hennessy got involved. He dug into the Mafia, the Stoppalianieri, the vendettas. He worked both sides, pulled loose testimonies, threats, confessions. He promised indictments that would end the Mafia in New Orleans. He dismissed his security. Thought the badge would protect him. He was wrong. The Wednesday before his killing, the Street Society met in secret. The vote was unanimous. Hennessy had to go. 2 crews were chosen. Armed with revolvers and blunderbusses, they created a killing triangle around his home. Afterward, they disappeared. Inside parish prison, Charles Matranga fought his case. He wanted access to private detective D.C. O'Malley, and reporter Frank Missionard Jr., Judge Marr, said no. The jail wasn't a newsroom. Matranga had lawyers, no special access. His attorney, Lionel Adams, filed a bill of exceptions, took it to the Louisiana Supreme Court. He claimed denying access was unconstitutional. The judge still said no. But Chief Justice Bermudez ordered a writ of certiorari, demanding all records be sent to the High Court. The legal fight wasn't over. Outside, tensions were primed to explode. The Weekly Citizen Democrat reported a secret American vigilante group, locals, not Italians, sworn to avenge Hennessy. They referenced 1850, when a mob slaughtered over 50 Sicilian immigrants. The police kept arresting. Some stuck, most didn't. 32 in one day. All Italians. All released. But Manuel Petro wasn't. Police called him the triggerman. A black woman swore she saw him receive firearms the day before. Another witness tied Joe Macheca, a powerful Sicilian figure, to the murder, via a cobbler's shop used as a lookout. Conclusion: the Macheca-Matranga machine ordered the hit. They were the shadow government of the Italian underworld. There was another theory: revenge. 2 ex-cons Hennessy had sent to prison had vowed to kill him and his cousin Mike Hennessy, who had already been ambushed in Houston. Same style, same setup. But the official narrative was locked in. The Mafia did it. David Hennessy had been working with the Pinkertons, had files from Italy, and was set to testify in the Provenzano retrial. That trial now had a body count. Hennessy's testimony could have unraveled the network. Instead, they erased him. The Italians arrested, Matranga, Macheca, Geraci, the Carusos, Sanzeri, Romero, were denied a preliminary hearing. The grand jury was still investigating. Their attorneys pushed for a writ of mandamus. The courts refused. The DA, Lusenberg, warned the Supreme Court not to interfere. The grand jury had a right to work in secret. Delay, he argued, was strategy. Meanwhile, New Orleans boiled. One shooter, Scafidi, survived the prison hit by Tom Duffy, who'd shot through the bars. I only wish there were 75 more like me, he said. Scafidi's confession pointed to the Matrangas, but his wound was minor. His credibility gone. Police weren't waiting. Petro was arrested. A woman identified him as the man handed weapons. Macheca was tied to the cobbler's shop. The neighborhood swarmed with Sicilian names: Bagnetto, Mastero, Incardona, Locoretti, Mortale, Minzeri, Patorno. Some had alibis, some didn't. Others were turned in by rivals. Most were carrying large sums of cash with no explanation. Mastero, the alleged lookout, claimed a head injury from falling off a cart, but it likely came from Hennessy's return fire. The location was key: a shack near the chief's route, a known hangout. The shooters were ready, concealed, armed with muskets, sword for close range. The killing was fast. Hennessy took over a dozen hits. He fired back, but collapsed. A responding officer was shot. A musket was found nearby. The press called it what it was: an execution, carried out by foot soldiers, ordered by the Matranga Macheca syndicate, cloaked in fear and silence. Whether the Mafia existed in meetings or only in the minds of frightened New Orleanians no longer mattered. It had power, and it had momentum. Mayor Shakespeare was warned, "You're next." Anonymous letters, hushed threats. The same silence Hennessy tried to break now cloaked the city. Behind the scenes, the Committee of 50 took shape. Citizens, businessmen, ex-cops, a private army. Everyone remembered 1850, a lynch mob, Sicilian blood in the streets. Now it was 1890, and the ground was shaking again.